Let's bring in tonight's studio guests, Matthew Barzan, former US Ambassador to the United Kingdom, and Nabila Ramdani, journalist, writer and broadcaster. Thank you both for joining us here on the programme. Nabila, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, just ending on the point there about rape being used as a weapon of war. These are serious allegations, and we can talk about, you know, the evidence and the investigation in a moment, but just your reaction there to Shari Mendez about why should women come forward if ultimately they're questioned?
Well, as you quite rightly said, and as Shari said herself, these are very serious allegations, and that's why I think they should be investigated in full. And might I say right away, you know, that talking about such allegation in a rational and sensitive manner is always going to be difficult, especially when expressions such as Holocaust grade or indeed mass rapes are used in the discussion because they sound so definitive. And that's why the need for full investigation is crucial because it needs to be in line with due process and it needs to be not just simply based on testaments from army reservists or indeed affiliated officials. That's crucial. The New York Times, for example, has just published an article where they cast doubt on earlier anecdotal stories and they point to inconsistencies in some witness statements and indeed changing stories. And they, for example, say that investigative journalists are now challenging original rape reports. So again, you know, war is vile under any circumstances, and as we are seeing in this particular conflict, the Israel-Hamas conflict, there have been particularly vile actions happening, including thousands of women being killed, children, including babies, women, including pregnant ones, and men in their thousands as well, mutilated and killed. There's clear video evidence of such atrocities happening and indeed bodies being mutilated and indeed obliterated. And so I think...
I mean, you know, Israel has now said that they're going to provide evidence that they will make that public. And the United Nations is currently in Israel and is talking about the fact that they're asking for victims more victims to come forward. But Matthew,
very quickly, if I may, in the context of when Israel is literally facing, you know, accusations of genocide, quite rightly, these allegations should be investigated on the basis of hard evidence and due process. And you would expect, you know, any allegations of war crimes or indeed such atrocities to be investigated with the same amount of scrutiny.
Just to pick up on what Nabila is saying there, I mean, the point, though, of this situation in particular is that it does take a long time. And you know, we were hearing there from the reservist, Shari, saying, I'm not an expert. I can only tell you what I saw as I went through the bodies.
Well, I mean, watching that interview with Shari that you did, and I was thinking about being on what I'd say, and the first word that popped into my mind, hearing that list of atrocities, just the ones that she witnessed, and then you add to it the New York Times and other reporting, and the word that came to mind was, this is just unspeakable. And then, of course, you realize that's the wrong word. If it remains unspoken, justice cannot be served. And so brave people like Shari, you for asking those voices to come up in a methodical and rigorous way is crucial.
Sorry, go ahead.
Might I simply suggest that in 2024, you know, we should be relying on physical evidence rather than just the testaments of, again, affiliated officials or indeed army reservists. And let's be honest, you know, they have this kind of rhetoric or indeed, you know, this kind of way of portraying your enemy as mass rapists has been used for centuries.
Yes, but I guess, you know, some of the points that were being made, ultimately, if it's even one woman, you know, that these need to be investigated, these cases.
Because, you know, accusations of rape have certainly been made against enemies in contexts of war for centuries. Germans were accused of mass rapes during the World Wars, so were the Vietnamese, so were the Russians. And so I think it's important, you know, to bear in mind the kind of rhetoric that also coming out from, you know, extremists within Israeli society, for example. And the idea is if you portray, you know, people who come from, as they say, barbarian communities, and they are depicted or projected as sexual deviants and indeed vile killers, then you are demonizing an entire community and not just Hamas, for example.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear on, what happened on October 7 was a horrific situation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think and I keep turning to words just because at this juncture, they really do matter. And to bring awareness to those of us who aren't in that part of the world, obviously come from the United States, and for people to to first understand and then not forget what actually happened. And I thought the first interview, given what she had been through, was incredibly calm and deliberate and not overstating and not engaging in, to your point, I think, Nabila, demonizing or categorizing with groups, describing actual victims and actual physical horrific mutilation as she saw it. And that...
Well, we're going to
didn't engage in the sorts of things.
We're actually going to continue this conversation. I'm just going to, continue with the other pieces that we have, because the story of sexual violence being used as a weapon of war is one we've heard so many times before. Baroness Hellich there. I've got my panellists here with me. I mean, Matthew, this idea that a international body can be created that perhaps can deal with this, because, of course, hundreds of thousands of women globally, if not millions, are impacted as a result of sexual violence being used as a weapon of war.
Yeah, and I was talking to a journalist, a colleague of mine at Tortoise Media, who knows a lot more about this than I do. And we talked about it a little bit before we came on set. It was when I served as ambassador 10-ish years ago, William Hague, who was foreign secretary at the time, teamed up with Angelina Jolie to bring attention
Baroness
to
Hellich actually was part of that.
Yes, that's where so I got to know her a little bit during that. So the PSVI, Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative. And it got a lot of sort of spotlight and attention. And then, of course, our attention turns elsewhere and the atrocities continue. And I am really hungry I'm no expert, but it would be really interesting to get, and the UK has lots of them, in related global efforts outside of this context, and including this context, to say what are the times where the world comes together with the best of intentions to eradicate horrific events, and where we get it wrong, where we have unintended consequences that end up preventing it. And she touched on one that this journalist colleague told me about, which is in a lot of the standard judicial procedures at International Criminal Court, for instance, these victims are forced. It is weirdly and perversely perpetrator. They don't mean to be, but these poor people have to re-traumatize themselves, not once, and the bravery that takes to relive this awful trauma, but multiple times for every single perpetrator. They have to go say the exact same thing over and over again, and that is, and she addresses that, things like that are meaningful process changes that can make a big difference. I'm sure there are others, and you, I'm sure, have...
Yes, I mean, Foreign Secretary William Hague confronted, the use of rape as a weapon of war, and I was very impressed that he made a direct link between seeking justice in order to achieve peace and indeed security. Now, that's very important, and again, crucially, that's why we need full investigations. And as the Baroness was suggesting, we can learn from history, sadly.
Because there is a sort of outrage and then very little done to deal with it.
Yes, but we know, sadly, from previous conflicts where such vile conduct has happened, that these tend to be the consequences of occupying armies. For example, men who spend weeks and indeed years living with their enemies. Now, in the Hamas case, the claim is that a relatively small force of invaders intent on killing and abducting as many people as possible in a small time window somehow created time to conduct mass rapes as well. Now, we know that most of the attackers on October the 7th were killed on the night itself, within a few hours, and certainly before nightfall.
Well, so again, all of these claims, as you say,
and precisely.
I do think, and I'm no expert, watching some of the verified video footage that you see of, and now we know her name, and I don't, of the young Israeli-German woman who was killed in the back of the pickup truck and then paraded through. So it doesn't seem to me incongruous that you can do a surprise attack, kill, rape, murder, mutilate all at once.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
That doesn't seem, I mean, it's...
The basic point is that the murders of the attackers were captured on video, for example, by helicopters and the like. And any investigation should be underpinned by, hard evidence in order to achieve justice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it's about, achieving justice
Precisely.
and an investigation taking place. Mark, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there from Washington, D.C. Let's get reaction now from our panellists. Matthew, I'm going to come to you because, of course, you were the US ambassador here in the UK. I mean, how would you assess President Biden's reaction, response, whatever strategy he may have? I mean, some people are describing it as a bit of a mess.
Oh, I don't. You would probably expect me to say I don't agree, and I don't. Mark's report, it reminded me, I would sit in those meetings, and I think that image that the viewers just saw of the British Secretary of Defense and the American one sitting opposite each other with their symbolic little flags is just about the exact wrong image of how our incredible alliance works. And so there weren't photos or cameras in the Tony Blinken meeting, and I bet that's like all the formal and informal meetings that happen between these two countries as allies. We are shoulder to shoulder. We don't always see eye to eye, but there's a lot of power in that. We don't need to be in lockstep. And I think you're going to see that. I think President Biden, I mean, they said we'll make a decision, I think is how Mark phrased it. He said the other day he has made his decision. Now, he's not going to go telegraph it and tell our enemies what we're going to go do. But he said he's made his decision, and it may be more than one thing, and it may play out over time.
But there's been so much talk about de-escalation, and all we've seen is escalation and a lack of deterrence.
I think there's four things, and we should link them with the word and, not the word but. We want to make sure our partner in Israel has a right to defend itself and is capable of defending its people after the horrific attacks of October 7th. And we want to see the stop of Palestinian and Israeli lives being lost in that area. And we want to see these hostages released and a humanitarian pause to be able to do that. And we want to, I have five, and we want to make sure that this does not spread beyond it. And we must hold responsible those people who killed 3 American servicemen and women and injured many more. We have to be able to do, and we can, and we have proven, we can do more than one thing at the same time. And those are not, they often work at cross purposes, but they're not hopelessly at cross purposes.
I mean, Joe Biden is certainly known as a hawk when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, we, of course, remember some of the kind of horrific rhetoric he was coming out at the beginning of the conflict, supporting the slaughter of Palestinians, effectively. But he has now changed his tone, and even he is waking up to the realization that what's going on is actually escalating and not, de-escalating, as it were. But there has certainly been a change of tone, a sharp change of tone in the past few weeks, undoubtedly due to the killings, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And as Mark was highlighting in his report, everybody has in mind a huge humanitarian crisis as well. And yesterday, even so-called moderate Israeli protesters were objecting to aid going into Gaza. And this has certainly caused some revulsion across the world. So I think there needs to be some... if you look at the UK, for example, Foreign Secretary David Cameron has always been the kind of restrained supporter of the Palestinian cause, but always also concerned about...
Well, he's now said in the last 36 hours...
Yeah, he's also now being very pragmatic and optimistically bringing about the idea of a two-state solution.
As is Secretary of State Blinken saying the same thing, echoing President Biden's thing. And I just think on your point, President Biden was, yes, very staunch in support of Israel after that horrific attack. And he was talking about Hamas as a terrorist organization, which is what our country has designated it. And that's what he was talking about, not the Palestinian people.
OK, do stay with us. Lots more coming up